I think today's chat is a little bit to talk about, and then feel free to add some things to the agenda. But we're going to talk about how like an idea or a piece of technology comes an idea, goes through a bit of validation from our team, and then goes through the technology onboarding cycle. And then so between Michelle, myself, and Manoj, we will probably kind of cover a little bit of the end-to-end journey. Now, I guess I'll warn you and have a disclaimer saying that not everything happens in the same order that we always want it to, but these are roughly all the steps it takes to get on board here at L&R Rogers. And so you can use this as some of your experience on not just working with us, but potentially other law firms or at other corporates. So we'll go through those steps. We'll also quickly flash up some of the systems that we work with here at L&R Rogers. Have all you guys met Manoj before? I think maybe some of you would have had maybe an assessment to fill from him, but Manoj is our Chief Technology and Security Officer. Is that right? CTSO?
Yep.
And then so he'll kind of cover the latter half of that stage. Anything else you guys want to cover before we start? Okay, sounds good. So don't have a big formal presentation, but mainly, I guess we'll kind of talk through the steps. So starting point can come from various locations where it could be interest that we have, like so our iHub team identified there's something missing, or one of our lawyers, or a lot of times our lawyers come in and say they worked at X and X firm before, and they want to see some new technology brought into here. Or they're interested in new legal tech, and they kind of flag it to our attention. So I guess first one is somebody showing interest, and they usually it shows up as an email in Michelle's inbox, or reaches out to like Manoj or myself for kind of that first contact. Second step is we do a brief high-level assessment. So we check in some of the basic things like, do they have Australian data residency? Are their servers here? I think that's like a big critical step for us to know that they can operate here in Australia. Usually they go off and they either schedule a demo or they rope a few of us in just to have a quick evaluation and understand the capabilities of that system a little bit more. What we should do, but don't always do, is then create some high-level requirements of what our expectations are from the system, right? So although Giles has been working on a little bit of a document for us, we don't always actually specify the capabilities that are required in the system, and it's not really the way our lawyers think about how to approach a system. But creating that high-level business requirements is kind of what's necessary next. And then from our innovation side, we create a lean business canvas. So many of you guys might have seen this as those business value canvases. I'll put an example on screen just so you can see what they look like. Share screen. But it's one of these guys, right? So listing out what the problem is, the goal statement that we have from it, some of the existing alternatives that we may consider. What does the solution do? Our measures of success and like how we're actually going to score it, and what the targets may be. What's the unique value proposition that we're going to have from like working together? How we're actually going to get it to work. So like what the implementation plan is. The unfair advantage. So what is going to make what we do together different than what's in the market or better? How might it fail? Some of the risks that are involved in doing this. potential clients that we might use for this, and that also links back to the fees earned or value provided later. And who might be early adopters? Usually they're like closer to the people and organizations and the persona of people that we would be targeting from this. What's the investment required? So what's the technology going to cost? This weighs into our return on investment, and then either hard dollars for fees earned or the value provided, and what that actually looks like and how that translates into a bit of a revenue schedule or a cost saving schedules, or the value that's provided in somewhat quantified the intangibles. So between, I guess, whoever's expressing interest and we as an innovation team work on this together with them, we start to construct, well, does it kind of meet the need and fit all these questions, right? They will take this, let's say if it's the lawyers that are taking it through, they will take it to their respective practice group leaders. A practice group leaders is one person leads the practice group, right? They get, I guess, a sign off of approval. And if it's involving like, a new technology, usually they'll also need approval from Michelle and Manoj to make sure that there's alignment between our innovation strategy as well as our technical architecture. But this is kind of the homework that they do to start. I'll pause there. Any questions? Anything to add, Manoj?
No.
All right. So yeah, goes through approvals. The other thing we start to check, and this is more Manoj's side, but we also look at what are the other enterprise systems and dependencies and integration opportunities that might be available with this new technology platform, or whatever it may be. And I'll pass it over to Manoj to cover the more technical side of things.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. So like Stephen said, it's not always the same way that we follow this. It all depends on, every case is a little bit different, but ideally this is what we tend to do. So once it's been reviewed, they've gone through the initial pre-assessment process, demo and all of that, we shoot through a cyber pre-assessment to the vendor, basically asking general questions around the certifications, the internal processes, do they have a backup, DR, where is it stored, access controls, who's got access to what, and then we review it internally within the security team. Once we give all the green ticks for that, I guess it comes down to the procurement piece, which is licensing and contract review. So we pass on the assessment, the contract to our corporate team, so they can incorporate into the contract if need be, as part of the sign off. So once that's done, then comes the deployment piece. So we need to understand, is it a practice group wide? Is it the whole of company, or is it just subset of group of people who will be accessing this particular application or platform?
Hey, so maybe a question from, does it make a difference on the size of deployment, whether it's a pilot group, whether it's a practice group or firm wide, and what's the variation?
Yeah, it does. So this is where we kind of plan out. So it also comes down to the licensing piece. How are we actually licensing this a platform or an application? So for us, it's always about ongoings as well. So if people are moving, add moves and changes. So how do we remove a license and add a license? How do we manage it? How much overhead our IT team will require? So this is where it's quite important to understand who's going to be accessing it. So if it's a practice group wide, we create a security group and add them to that group and remove them and manage it that way. If it's a firm wide, do we go device based? Okay, how many devices do we have, and use licensing model that way. So it's quite important to understand what the initial pilot is going to look like and what the future might look like, so we can kind of design our deployment accordingly.
And just on the future piece, are you guys generally sort of coming to a stance these days where you're looking at any technology that you do on board? What's the length of the contract that you prefer to have? Like, are you sort of saying, hey, if we can get that 3-year contract so we can kind of forecast that cost, is that a preferred stance, or where's that up to these days?
It's a tricky one, Stu, because as you know, with tech, things change so quickly. And the days of having 3-year contracts, although from financially it is probably more beneficial, but we do need to be ready for when the time comes. If we do need to switch another application, another platform, we need to be ready for it. So it is changing a lot. So say 3 years ago, yep, three-year contract is the way to go. But I'm seeing more and more a yearly one as a preferable method to go.
Yep. I bet Michelle has an opinion on this.
Michelle has an opinion on it. I would not sign a contract for longer than 12 months. I can't think the last time particular vendors do push, but I think they've probably learnt of late that it's going to be a pretty hard sell, even with a discount for a longer period, to go much beyond 12 months.
Yeah. It's interesting because I've actually had it the other way around a couple of times where, the procuring party has sort of requested that length of term, and to be honest, it's almost like this handshake agreement, because at the end of the day, there's always a lot of clauses in these contracts to allow parties to separate. Some of the contracts that I've signed over the past have a termination for convenience clause, which is like, well, why do we even have a contract, sort of thing. But it's sort of, from a SaaS provider perspective, from the vendor's perspective, it's less about saying, hey, we're going to lock you in, we're going to hold you at gunpoint for 3 years and we're going to get that revenue. It's more about saying, hey, from an investor's perspective, they're seeing some sort of commitment to say, hey, it's more than just like every year we're going to reassess it. There's a level of commitment beyond that. Interesting.
And it depends on, when I was previously part of bigger organizations, they want to do that to lock in a bit of security. So they even though they could break the relationship for any kind of loose purpose, it's locking in that pricing, knowing that it's not going to skyrocket somewhere. And it's part of a procurement function to like ask to make sure that can we get a longer term partner contract?
Yeah, or do we need one? Or Yep. Cool, thanks.
Yeah, so that's where the licensing kind of comes in, so we can plan out the deployment piece. And then from an infrastructure side, it's again, every application is different. Could be a cloud platform, SaaS, on-prem. So the deployment process is quite different again. So how many servers you need. If it's a cloud platform, is there any firewall exceptions we need to make? How does the data flow, and where does the data flow into? And where else does the data flow needs to go to? So that's a whole different planning piece that we do as well. And I guess from a packaging perspective, again, it's a different application is different. So it could be just an add-in on Outlook that we push out, or it could be an application on the computer that needs to be installed. So again, we use SCCM at Landers. So we use SCCM to package up the deployment, whether it be a self-service so they can go and install it themselves, or we do a proper install overnight. And the ongoings, I guess, like Michelle mentioned, we review it. Is it actually getting used? I guess that's where the 12 months comes in, and what the usage and what's the uptake like as well. So it's well and good we're putting a new platform or a new application in. Is it actually getting used? That's a pretty major piece, and maybe it's getting used really well, and we want to expand it to other practice groups or wider community. So that's also quite important function that we started doing in the last three to 4 years.
Actually, maybe I'm gonna point out, Michelle, do you want to actually talk about some of the examples of utilization? I know a certain Thomson Reuters product I remember you looking at, and being able to pull those utilization stats are really, really key for us, because I mean, maybe they were hiding the fact that we weren't using that service at all, but having that reporting is really key.
Yeah, so look, we've changed tact on a lot of things. So I think, like Manny mentioned, certainly the last 3 to 4 years, we've really tightened up our software. So we did have all sorts of things across the business. We also had multiple tools effectively doing the same thing, which was just a user preference. And that was really not having a proper procurement structure in place of reviewing and going through the necessary steps. We have lost access to kind of some key opportunities that we used to have to kind of, review the market. It is hard to stay on top of the tech and to work through what gaps we do have and what we could best take advantage of. We are a bit limited in Australia, and I certainly every year used to go to the US, and back then I would have said that ILTA was the best place to go and spend a week, look at all the tools, come up with a bit of a strategy for the next kind of 12 to 18 months about opportunities to pilot and test. We just don't have that. So it's just become a little bit ad hoc, I guess. But some of the service offerings from those vendors and the gaps that do remain, particularly for larger ones, I don't find this the case so much for smaller implementations, but I guess just the lack of transparency, particularly across usage, and the effort required for us to maintain user accounts internally, and then when it's coming up time for renewal, which I have dates sitting in my diary to review on usage, it's next to impossible to get any level of engagement to say, well, we've had a system like Practical Law now for 3 years in one practice group. Who's used it in the last 6 months, and what have they used? What's of interest to them? What are the gaps? And we constantly go around in circles, I guess, with some of those more substantial based software offerings. So I still think we've got a bit of work to do, but I must say when it comes time for budget review and we go through the list of the software, we do have a pretty lean ship now. And that's why, although we would have signed probably 3 more longer termed contracts previously, we have really wound that back to 12 months because we change as well. And I did feel that we were locked into some. I felt like they were hanging over my head all the time.
And do you reach back out to the business at all during that review process of usage, or obviously you can't just rely on the vendor?
We can't rely on it. I don't, there's no vendor. Oh, sorry, that's not true. So we ran probably, I think, more recently, one of the best kind of RFP processes we ran was in the e-discovery space. And off the back of that, I now get monthly reporting. So that was a part of the RFP. That was a requirement that I wanted oversight of everything that we were running through the e-discovery, just from a risk perspective, as well as to get a handle on the tech. So we worked with them as our clients tell us what reporting. We kind of flipped that and said, well, this is the monthly reporting that we require so that we can stay on top of the usage and know where projects are at across the firm, particularly because that's a national RFP that we ran. And now we've just got a reduced panel of 2 providers. So that was kind of them weighing up, I guess, having to implement that from their side was to obviously have a fairly large chunk of the share of the e-discovery work from us.
Yeah, but during that process, like, the statistics aren't always the full picture in terms of, are we getting value from this? So, do you have time to go back out to the business and say, hey, like, are you liking it? Do you want to, do you have time to do that 360-degree review?
Yeah, we do before we re-sign. So Manny's just got an invoice in yesterday, so I've got Joel scouting around now on that. But I mean, what we don't have time is for new onboarding of people. So the gap currently is we change people. We've got a tool like a contract review tool in place in the groups that's applicable for. We get new lawyers that come on. It just gets missed in the wash, and then at the end of the year we're up for renewal and we've still got all these excess licenses, and now everyone wants to have a look and see if they will use it, and then by the time it comes back around again we're back in the same position.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah,
So
it
it
also
is-
comes down to training as well, right? I mean, we have a set induction training, but they don't teach all the tools in the training. Each practice group have different tools.
Are you finding the vendors been forward about saying, hey, let us do some internal awareness? Like, or do you want vendors to do that? Because I was always a bit unsure. Like, you know, if I was to say, hey, I'll come in and like do some awareness training to your property team, to your, you know, litigation team, whatever it is.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So Joseph, I would say Joseph and Checkbox are the best at that by far. So they're the first ones to jump at any opportunity to get in front of a group of people to run a training session.
Yeah.
So that's part of their model. It is the newer startups that kind of do implement that as a part of their overall implementation and stay more actively involved.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the ones that have a proper customer success function in their business and not just the title. Yeah.
Yeah. I think maybe that earlier point, user management, it's a little bit part of like the way we're set up in our fault and in terms of how we onboard, offboard all the right users for all the right tools. And, you know, having like something like a single sign-on capability makes a big difference for that. But the awareness piece and, you know, it's great for the first few times. And I know there's a lot of vendors will reach out to do those initial sessions. I guess what we haven't been so great at, or maybe following up with the vendors, is ongoing because of the turnaround. There's new faces in the groups all the time, and then if a year goes by, there's like, you know, a good handful that are already out of the loop, don't have the right licenses to, or don't have the right subscriptions and access to some of our tools.
And I think a bit of that comes down to licensing models. So I think more time could probably be spent on the way that things are packaged up. So when you get into these, you know, 30 user licenses, like it's such a headache to then manage at that level.
Yeah. Especially when you've got it going across 15, 20, 30, 40 platforms, you know, like it's,
Yeah. So just a reminder, we're a firm of nearly 600, between 600 full and part-time staff. And then of that, how many of them are permanent? Probably like closer to 500, I'd say, maybe less. Yeah, so managing licenses is like Manny's like weekend job.
Yeah, and you don't use a platform for that. Like, there's no solution for that. There's no technology to solve the technology problem. Like, I don't know.
No, I mean, we tried different ways. You try to use Power BI. We tried to even went back to the whole Excel sheet. Yeah, it's quite hard to be on top of it. It's a full-time job.
Yeah, it is.
Anything left on yours, Manoj?
No, so the final piece is the ongoing assessment we're hoping to start in the near future. So we started the pre-assessment, the whole cybersecurity piece. What it'll be like, it's more of a 12-month check-in to say, hey, do you guys still following these things that you said you're doing? So things could change on your end, so we wait for the update, and so we can keep track of that as well. So that's the ongoing function.
Yep. Okay. Interesting.
Cool. And then the last thing, I'll put it up on screen, is this is not an exhaustive list of our systems, but we created this when we had recently implemented Adirant. Some of the bigger enterprise systems, of course, would be no stranger to you guys. It's iManage, Intap for our complex check. IntelliHR is what we use for our people system. ADP is our payroll system, but you know, we have a smattering of other systems that kind of either tie in or link into Adirant. Outside of this, Manoj, is there anything else?
We need a bigger sheet. yeah, it's a whole lot of other functions that sits outside of Adirond as well. So there's quite a bit of movement within that. But yeah, in this particular snapshot, kind of tackles all the big pieces.
Yeah.
So that's a quick overview on kind of like how it, from idea to software in our system to how it kind of like gets put into our ecosystem.
Can I ask more, I guess this is more of a individual person's preference, but I've always been curious, how do you prefer a vendor reach out to you? In what manner do you like? I mean, you know what I mean? Like the whole cold call, like it's damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of thing, right? Like I don't know, right? Like what's your best? Give me a story of like the best experience where a vendor from just out of the blue has sort of reached out to you. So you haven't found them, but they've found you, and it's been a good experience. Do you have one? You might not have one.
Well, I used to be really good at emails and staying on top of them till I think Steve told me one day, "Oh, do you respond to everyone?" I'm like, "Yeah, I always respond. I always review."
Really?
I did. I used to respond to people, at least give them the courtesy of saying, I'll file it, thank you, type of thing. The volume of late is like, that is a full-time job. I am at a point where I can't read them. Manny can probably track how many I would get, and he probably gets the exact same ones a day. But I mean, I would probably get in excess of 10 automated emails, and the worst part is the continued automate. I'm at a point now which I don't like to admit of. I actually block them.
I'm thinking of changing my number, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, on the email front, because I've seen these systems. The systems are very good at intelligently mapping out when to send you that follow-up email and things like that. So when you're blocking them, you're not blocking a person. Like it looks like people are getting very good at making it look like they're individually writing these emails, and there's always some tells, but the systems like HubSpots and your Salesforces and things, and I've implemented these automated systems, like the drip feed campaigns, all the marketing stuff that's available now. It is annoying, right? I'm getting them as well on my side of the business, and they're random. They're not even relevant to me sometimes, right? Like it's hard, but I know that they're automated. They're drip feed campaigns. They're based upon open, time spent looking at the email. If it's been clicked, it triggers it 7 days later, all that kind of shit. So it's just block it.
Probably the best one that I've actually done something about, e.g., I've then opened it, reviewed it, contacted them. I did just before Are You OK Day, which was someone that had sent an interactive video, and it was an example of the use of that technology where you could complete a training based video where you can touch the screen and choose your own adventure. The video was really short, and I do find the same thing at some of the conference events now. When they go into those separate booths that you can go into with vendors, if they have a 3-minute video just doing a quick overview of it, that's enough to know whether it's really going to be something that's topical at the moment or of interest in looking at a bit further. I would say that's then sending these automated blocks of text, which as anyone in my team would be able to attest to, I won't read paragraphs of anything. To have a video to just simply explain, and BNext have just done this amazing smart legal contracts, which you should have a look. I'm sure Martin won't mind me sharing, Stu. He just drew that himself, like a little animation to actually explain what a smart legal contract is. It's 3 minutes out of your life, and it tells the story. And for something like Syncly, which is a bit confusing on paper to understand what it's really going to do, if you could visualize the usage, because I mean, you've done well at that to date, and people certainly at Landers understand it, because Manny, did you notice Genevieve at the C-suite meeting this morning said, "Oh, well, we could get Syncly to fix that problem." So that's a win, Stu, for you.
Yeah, cool. And I'm always interested, right? Because it's sort of like you spend a lot of time on this side of the fence, and it evolves rapidly. Like the things that are catching your attention, the way that people are breaking through the noise, and you know, we might go full circle, right? It might be like the flares coming back in fashion. We might go back to simple words in 10 years, but for now it seems to be, you know, that there's a certain way of doing it. But also the whole social selling side of things is really important now as well. Like I've always done a lot of training from a sales perspective to sort of make sure that they know who you are when you reach out. Because if you see an email from somebody that you at least recognize, you're much more likely than a name that you've never known before, sort of thing. So the whole, you know, you got to put a lot of effort into it before you have the right to send an email, in my view. But yeah.
I'll give you two scenarios. One is I just pasted in there. It's one of the more memorable ones, but still didn't work. And that was just on an email campaign. And then two, or I think I find upcoming up is the Hour of Power. Having a quick demo and snapshot, we are more likely to reach out to them based on seeing something like that.
Yeah.
So some from a group or an association rather than, cold call.
Yeah, we do all talk. So Alta do send that around, and I normally get it hits internally. So they've got quite an extensive list of contact points into the firm. So often people will reference something that's in there and say, have we seen this? Is it worth going along to have a look at? So it probably is a reason. That's probably all we've got at the moment, to be honest, in terms of being able to have that showcase, which is obviously what events like ILTA offered, with being able to have the marketplace, and obviously conferences which have gone for the rest of the year and have been gone probably for the last 2 years, to be honest, since we were able to get to a conference to even have a conversation with someone.
Yeah. And how much do you guys judge a book by its cover these days? So websites, you know, there's some good and bad examples of websites out there, but, you know, do you find that as an important piece of like the whole branding, the trust nature of who you're talking to? We don't really care.
Well, I mean, we've got a recent example of that, which I would have to say, well, we clearly don't care, because I must say their branding is awful.
Yeah. Yeah.
I better not say their name, but no. I mean, I never look at websites. Does anyone? I wouldn't go to a website.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah.
I do.
I don't think. Do you? I don't think I ever have. I can't even think of kind of current smart tools and things that we've got that I've ever gone to their website.
Yeah. Because you know that it's sort of not, it's going to tell a very marketing story, you know, it's going to probably confuse you, whatever. Yeah.
It's the same. I mean, we would say the same thing about our website.
Yeah.
In terms of when we monitor the traffic of who's actually looking at our website.
Yeah, that's true.
I look at it from a security perspective too. Like if they have a security function, they're selling a product, they generally do. So we do review it initially, even if we want to send out before we send out a pre-assessment, we just have a quick look, even if it's worth pursuing.
Yeah.
That's quite important to have that, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going on there just to make sure it looks like a legitimate company. There's other links to it and people are referencing it. Three is top thing I'm usually looking for is a how-to video, or like how it actually works, an explainer. Because it's a lot of them feature a book a demo with us now, and that's kind of annoying unless you actually see at least a preview of how it's going to work for you, and then maybe you're interested.
Yeah.
Or an example. So an example from another firm, I think, puts a bit of context because it's more relatable. People don't.
Example.
Sorry.
A case study type of example. Yeah.
Yeah, but just it's a little bit more trusted, I guess, particularly given like the legal industry generally. I think that if you do see another firm that's kind of been using a particular tool, it's certainly something that we do actively look at as well. Like I would always then review to see what that particular tool is and what it's doing. And
okay. And just your stance at the moment on, sorry, I'm kind of hogging the airtime here, but your stance at the moment on trials. Do you like have we don't procure anything without a trial, or how do you generally approach that stage of a sale?
From
Yeah,
my
yeah.
perspective, we tend to do proof of concept, so and proof of value, whatever they call it now, and review it and see if it's worth pursuing. And
Yeah.
I would say, but we do tend to make that decision early enough that we are most probably going to go with them, but we do want to test the waters before we go ahead.
Yeah.
So that's generally how we would approach it from a tech perspective.
Yeah. Yeah.
I say like we pilot almost everything except for like those large enterprise systems that we can't.
I can't think the last time we didn't pilot something.
Yeah.
Purely, I mean, that's just really from experience as well, that we've learnt from our mistakes with being promised the world. And then when it comes time to the implementation, it's just not really meeting our requirements at all. There's lots of gaps. We've got a very recent example of that. So maybe we haven't learned our lesson, but
it's tough, isn't it? And do you okay? You know, are you finding that vendors are either sort of just saying you do it, there's no charge, or you're okay, you know, covering costs sort of thing, you know, time, covering it costs from a time perspective? Like, how are you generally seeing that play out at the moment?
I mean, it's generally a period of time. We've had a couple we've paid for. For the most part, we don't, because we're Steve's right in that we're probably not going to get to the point of piloting something just for the sake of it. We're probably pretty close. That is really the final step in the process. So I guess from my perspective, I do have a bit of a reluctance for paying for the pilot unless it's then coming off the ongoing costs associated with the software. If we decide not to proceed, there's obviously kind of a time-based model that we would consider. But I think it's a bit different. So, and Giles, I don't know if you want to add anything from UK, but I know outside of Australia, the model's very different. So I am conscious of that dealing with vendors in other countries, they are used to having paid pilots, and other people that we've kind of looked at those tools, like they're quite substantial fees attached to them. And I guess there comes a nervousness that this has to work, because if you are paying a large sum for a pilot, you
I think you've hit the nail on the head there in terms of like, where in the timeline are you doing it? Because a lot of people will sort of say, it's the first thing, you know, like, hi, you know, do you do document automation? Yeah, we do. Okay, great. Can I have a free trial? And you're like, well, you know, we haven't gone through this process yet. I don't know how invested you are in this, you know, and from a vendor's perspective, I don't have unlimited resources to manage tons of free trials. So the fact that you've said that you sort of do it towards the end is like, okay, we're sort of 80-70% sure, you know, this now needs to sort of prove what we've sort of learned and understood it to prove.
It's also important to have a success criteria for that pilot as well. That's very important. Without putting that in scope, you're just piloting for the sake of piloting.
Yeah.
So because we show you the business case, there is a definite need for that type of that type of product. So we've already kind of gone through the stage of approving and making sure that there is a necessity for that. So we're kind of most of the way there. It's mainly just checking that it does work. It does the thing it says. The people, users, more importantly, are receptive to it and believe in it. And then, Giles, were you about to come on?
Yeah. I was just going to say, I think it totally should and does in the UK depend on whether the vendor or their software type or the trial, I suppose, or pilot, whatever we're calling it, involves man hours really. I think a lot of us providers have got pretty comfortable with having to give away, some of the actual software at that stage of proceedings, but it's more about, if there's going to be sort of man hours actually automating something, or probably even more key, because it's usually a more pressed resource. If there's going to be any form of integration involved in the pilot, it's a dev hour, which generally speaking, that there is an opportunity cost for a paying client, because there's only so many of the best devs and so much of their time. So I think, generally speaking, on a pilot, the less sort of professional hours that are going to be spent, the closer it can get to free. And actually, it tends to be that when people are piloting us, they do want to expend quite a lot of hours. And I think my one comment would be actually, what really stuck out is, I think, Michelle, you said, actually one of your pilots failing was a sign of sort of maybe picking the wrong people. But actually for me, that's sort of, the odd one failing is actually a really encouraging sign, because we basically negotiate pilot contracts which are full rollout contracts, except there's no upfront commitment from the client, and ultimately I think it's really encouraging that the odd one fails, because it shows that you're actually using a pilot for what a pilot should be used for, in a way. Obviously if it fails because someone's misstated what they do, then that's something quite different. But yeah, I actually think that sort of approach that we've had so far with you guys has been really good from that perspective. I mean, like things like data requirements, things like both residency and also data destruction and this kind of thing. I've had ridiculous conversations about that, and also hosting arrangements with people for a pilot where there's no client information being used, and also confidentiality provisions where it's, maybe we're automating an NDA. And so I think, taking that more commercial approach is really, really helpful to us. The other thing I just thought I'd mention, just while I'm sort of got the floor, was it's really annoying because I totally agree with you on the video point. If I could just send one video, in my emails and nothing else, I would. But actually, I would say something like 95% of law firm email servers block video. For very obvious and legitimate reasons, because obviously if you click a video and it turns out to be malicious, then that's a really big problem. But it's sort of, it's one of the, again, it's sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't again. And actually the same thing applies, but probably to about maybe between 20 and 40% when it comes to a link alone. I'm not making an excuse here. It's more just to say that actually I think we're more on the same page.
Yeah, valid.
Good point. Maybe that's why I don't see many, Giles. Manny's already blocked them.
Yeah, pretty keeper.
The other thing I've always thought would be great is if, like the campaigns, in the same way we do with this newsletter, like if a whole range of different software providers could put something together, like a newsletter, like a quarterly newsletter that goes out to, new emerging tech that's come on, enhancements to the existing systems with a little highlight, just some sort of summary of what's happening, like would certainly from, I would say, law firms' perspective, enable you to have a better handle on what's happening. It's like, is it David Bushby? Is that who
the
does
Drag and all those ones? Yeah. Like
they're great. That's one of the things that I always look at, because it has kind of the latest, what's happening, who's changed roles. There's a little summary. We get the wash up at the end of the week of all the kind of topical articles as well that we then review. Like there's just those constants that that you're going to get and you can wait for it. We don't get that from software because I think the competition's a bit different, I guess. And so it's just this constant barrage that you have to try and sort through. And Steve, you did have a little run at trying to consolidate something, didn't you? Like a reference guide on kind of some demos and things in order to make it a bit easier internally. But I mean, that all takes a lot of work as well, because we all spend, some weeks we spend an incredible amount of hours in demos and things.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. Not easy.
Sorry, Stuart. I didn't mean to speak over you there.
Sorry.
One thing I was really, really keen to get out of today's session was, just to hear it from Manoj. And obviously you list as many as you like or as few as you like, but what are your sort of key red flags, as it were, in terms of, you've got a technology solution that, all the partners want, all the sort of internal tech team think is great. What kind of things are either going to kill the deal from a tech perspective, and I'm thinking particularly information security, and if they don't kill the deal, they're going to make the sort of terms of the contract or the ways of operating materially sort of worse for the vendor. Would be really interested to hear from your perspective on that.
I guess it's all comes down to security more than anything else, to be honest. I mean, platform's a platform. I mean, that's if it's ticking all the boxes from the partnership perspective, practice group perspective, and the tech perspective, it comes down to the security and how we can control it. That's pretty much the all end all type of decision. If it's not going to stack up from a security perspective, it's very hard sell. End of the day, we need to manage how the data flows, how the data is stored, and how we manage that data. That's pretty much it.
If I could be really, yeah, I mean, I guess that's really what I'm getting at, because I you know, I mean, obviously it's a highly scientific exercise, but I have to say sometimes when I'm investigating the differences between, for example, UK, Australia, US, it almost feels like there's some philosophy going on. You know, I guess philosophically, where do you stand on some of that stuff? Because for example, we will get people who will insist on cloud for information security reasons, and we will get people who will insist on on-prem. And then if we do an on-prem, the way that they deploy on-prem updates, for example, will be different between different providers, and different providers will, for example, prioritize having the latest version of our software, you know, so that they have all the latest patches, etc., versus others who will say, you know, we're only going to do it every X number of months, again for security reasons. So you know, and also I guess, you know, what do you know, for example, if it is a cloud hosting arrangement, you know, what do you look in a cloud provider? You know, that, I mean, you know, this might just be a little bit technical, but this is all stuff that we grapple with, and has sort of really significant business costs for us around the way that we do things. So I'd be really interested to hear you know, give a really honest take on it.
Yeah, I mean, each platform's different as well. I mean, when we personally anyway, when we look at platform, we do look at cloud first, but not all platform or an application needs to be cloud. I mean, some things we prefer to be on-prem, where we have control. Again, it comes about data and how we can manage that data. And you're right about the whole patching and updates and all that. That becomes very tricky and a bit outdated because we don't touch it for a long time when it's on-prem. Personally, I think cloud first should be the first way to look at it. Purely because of what you just mentioned. It's the ongoing upkeep is onus on the vendor rather than the internal staff.
Yeah, and look, we just signed a contract that was on-prem, and you know, it was interesting because the contract had to deviate slightly around certain responsibilities that we had to place on the buying party, you know, and that was around, you know, we can't be held responsible for certain vulnerabilities if you're not held responsible for maintaining certain, you know, up-to-date versions of the platform, because that's the only way that we can protect you from vulnerabilities. And so there was a lot of toing and throwing around all of that, and it was, I think it got a bit bottom drawer type contract stuff, because at the end of the day, you know, we can't be held responsible purely for keeping you, if there's a new vulnerability and you're on an old version and happens to exploit a, you know, something in that code or something in that sub license, then fine, we can't. What can we do? So it is an interesting one. If you guys now, are you a firm stance on data has to be stored in Australia, or are there exceptions to that that you know of?
There are some exceptions, but which is not client related. If it's a business services and it's and we're not putting any client side data, then there's exceptions that we can probably discuss a little bit more on. But when it comes to the client, yeah, there's a firm stance on the residency needs to stay in Australia.
Yep.
Can I ask one more very specific? Oh, sorry, I keep doing it.
You're right, mate.
Yeah, one really specific question. So we're a really modern company in that we're actually a remote first company at the moment, and one of the areas where we score poorly on a lot of information security questionnaires, and I say poorly sort of reluctantly, is our networking arrangements, and that's because we don't have a network. We don't have a physical office. I mean, we occasionally, a few of us reside in a few co-working spaces, or obviously, if we were able to, we'd be residing within your offices, or the designated hub areas, I should say. What's your view on networking and in the market? Chatting to your colleagues, is there any movement on this idea of investigating the networking arrangements and stuff?
When you say networking arrangements, Charles, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry. What do you mean by that? Your own.
I mean, so we get loads and loads of questions. I can't even tell you how many, about the way that our sort of internal office network is set up, and also about how it's secured, and what devices have access to it and things. But it's just not relevant. Like it's not irrelevant.
It shouldn't be anyway. Yeah, that's it's nothing to do. It's your access to client data, so our data per se. How do you access our data is the whole premise of your security that I would be looking at.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, nothing to do with how your internal, where you're sitting at home or in a home office or a separate office. It shouldn't really matter. It's all about how you access our data from your computer, per se. Yeah. That is the most important.
And look, that's sort of our understanding. I just was really interested to sort of dig in and hear whether you've heard any conversations about it, because to me it doesn't really make a lot of sense. But I guess it's just a bit of a lag that people haven't really. A lot of these policies, things like SIG-Lite, which we get a lot in the US, hasn't really moved on in terms of the contents of these, I guess, accreditations, I would call them.
Well,
anyway,
sorry, Giles, please go on.
Oh, no, that's okay. I was just going to say thank you.
Great. Yeah. So, I mean, sort of continuing on your topic about how sort of vendors access your sort of client data. I mean, there are a lot of vendors right now who employ BYOD policies, where you have basically unmanaged devices, and the only reason that's possible is because everything's on the cloud, right? You access it via HTTPS, encrypt it via TLS, whatever. I mean, how would you guys feel in that scenario? Because we have come across many sort of, especially American law firms, who are not comfortable with these BYOD policies, with all sorts of unmanaged devices, without that VPN, corporate network, etc.
Yeah, I mean, it's a case-by-case basis as well. I mean, we get asked the same question from our clients around our policies around BYOD and how we access our systems and how we manage, because we are managing their data, so they need to be sure that we are well protected. So yeah, it is a very tricky one because of the smaller the companies as well. I mean, I've spoken to Stu about this as well, like having a SOC 2 type of or ISO 2700 certification. It's not the easiest thing to get, and it's time consuming and expensive. But yeah, it's as long as the perimeter is protected, I'm happy with it personally.
Okay, fantastic.
Any other questions out there?
I was just gonna say I've got to be very impolite and just say I've got to very quickly ring the doctor's surgery, because I've got to get an appointment today, and they start the queue now, and I've got another call with some of you on this call momentarily. So I've got to apologise and say thank you very much, and I'll be on that call as soon as I can.
Thanks, Giles.
Thank you. Bye.
Giles being polite is like that doesn't happen. As a polite person, I know.
Could I just ask a quick question for me? Just in terms of how you guys are thinking about price sort of along this procurement process, do you guys sort of usually have an idea of what you think the value of this service might be? And then does that sort of shift along the way when you're doing a pilot? And then how are those prices, like the nitty gritty, sort of ultimately sort of finalized? Do you find you're sort of always getting a discount apparently, or like what's the yeah, I'd just be more interested in hearing a bit about that from your perspective.
You want to take that, Michelle, or should I?
Michelle's on mute.
I can speak to that in relation to more, I guess, the smart tools, etc., that we focus on. Manny deals more broadly in terms of enterprise-wide, like Microsoft. I'm sure that all comes with quite a different level of negotiation and backwards and forwards, I guess. Look, we have a reasonable sense in the market of worth, I guess, and that's just from experience of other tools. So it's reasonably consistent, I would say. It's only outside of Australia that I find there's such a huge gap between price points of software from Australian founded companies to the US and the UK. There's a huge void, really. So when we've done various we did this full review of all case management systems 12 or 18 months ago, and I think we reviewed 30 different platforms, and the variation, it's all full. We've got like a 40-page document. Like Joel worked tirelessly at reviewing the market, and you can just see such a huge variation in price point across the different countries, I guess. But I mean, locally, it's been probably a while where we've been hit with a price that we don't think someone spent quite a considerable amount of time reviewing the market and knowing where they sit before anything's brought to us anyhow. So
not that recently.
I don't know which one you're talking about. I don't know which one you're talking about, but maybe I'll have to think about that. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, some of those big ones, like particularly recent with COVID, I must say, like some are pretty tough now. Like some that we do push back on, they do have a bit of a like it or lump it. So some of the electronic signing platforms certainly sit in that category. So.
Maybe as for change in the price as we go through the process, I think there's a set expectation right at the beginning, and usually even before we engage too deeply with the vendor, we do get a basic underlying expectation of what they're expecting as well. So it doesn't fluctuate that much unless, and even if it didn't work or doesn't work to the outcome that we like, we probably wouldn't get it.
Yeah, gotcha.
Good. I think we're 5 minutes overdue, and we do have to, I guess, meet with a few other colleagues now. Open for more questions to, Michelle, Manoj, and myself. If you guys think of anything, feel free to reach out. We won't ignore your emails.
Stu's been blocked. He's been blocked in my email.
Hey, Michelle, what are you? See you guys. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
All right, bye.
See you guys.